Today we are going to attempt to answer the question of what is constitutionalism? Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in to Joe the Lawyer. Today is the first episode in a new series that I am going to do on the history of the United States Constitution that we are going to analyze by going through Supreme Court case law. At the same time, I'll throw in some other scholarly work and other history documents, and the goal is really to get a greater understanding of the United States Constitution using the vehicle of Supreme Court case law supplemented by other documents, scholarly works, even YouTube videos. I hope that you enjoy this series and that you stick with me through this journey. If you think this is a worthy cause and you like my channel, you like my content, please subscribe, like, comment, and share. It's a free way to support the show. I also have a Patreon. You can sign up for my newsletter. All of those things helps me. If you subscribe, if you make a little bit of donations, it helps me free up more time to make this great content. However, this content will always remain free. Now, before we get into answering the question of what is constitutionalism, let me tell you why I am doing this. Like most of you who are watching this video, you grew up in the United States, and the Constitution is sort of this mythical document in this country. I remember as a child being 10, 11 years old, reading in the history books about the Founding Fathers, also mythical figures, and I just revered them. I thought they were the greatest, people in the world. They had created this country, and they had written this document, and it was just amazing. However, much of my life, I didn't really understand or know what the Constitution was or what it meant. I gained a bit of a greater understanding when I went to college. I was a political science major in my undergrad, and I studied the separations of power and some of the stuff that had to do with the Constitution. Then when I went to law school, I was required to take 1 year of constitutional law, and I was looking forward to it, and it turned out to be my favorite class, where I gained a much greater understanding of the Constitution. We also study the Constitution in law school in other classes, such as criminal law, because it sort of seeps into all areas of law, and it's truly foundational. I think most of us understand that it's foundational in United States law. So I'm making this channel because I want to share my knowledge, my joy, my love of the Constitution with my viewers. Hopefully we can all learn something, and it'll give us a greater understanding of how our government works. It can even be applied to contemporary news. In addition, I served in the military for 4 years, and I was 19 years old taking an oath to defend the United States Constitution. Later on, when I became an attorney, I took another oath to uphold and stay true to the Constitution. So really, in this Constitution, in this country, we put the Constitution above any human, any person on this earth, any being, any office. The Constitution is paramount. It's really a magical sort of document. And so I want us to understand why it is what it is, and also how it works and how it operates. And mostly I'm going to use the vehicle of Supreme Court case law going forward. So let's get to the question of today. What is constitutionalism? And I did a little bit of research, and I found 3 definitions which I like. We'll start with one by legal scholar C. Perry Patterson. He stated, "Constitutionalism is the name of the trust which man reposes in the power of a document as a means of controlling a government." And he adds that it's a device for the prevention of tyranny and the protection of human rights. Then I took a quote from James Madison. You could probably quote all the founding fathers of the United States in one way or another, but he states, "In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, it is necessary to oblige it," meaning the government, "to control itself." And then finally, I have legal scholar David Feldman, who states, and this is paraphrasing, but this is my favorite. He states, Constitutionalism is a concept that holds government officials to the rule of higher law, as opposed to the fiat or the whim of ruling officials. Politicians are not free to do anything that they please in a constitutionalist government. The touchstone of constitutionalism is limited government under a higher law. I love that phrase right there. So I dug into my constitutional law textbook as well, and that's a textbook done by Stone and a couple other authors if you want to look it up. And what they stated, there's two basic ideas about constitutionalism. Number one is that government should operate according to widely understood principles and rules. And number two, these principles and rules should respect and protect a set of individual rights. Now, growing up in the United States, this may be sort of self-evident to you, but it was not in the vast expanse of history. Constitutionalism is widely, in my opinion, a reaction to alternative form of government and what forms of government existed for most of human history, and that is the rule of a king, queen, emperor, dictator, an individual who could literally change the law with their words. And sometimes not even just an individual, but a small group of people like an oligarchy or an oligopoly, where a plutocracy you hear if you really get into political science, where either one person or a small group of people could change the law and do whatever they wanted within the law, within the country, whenever they wanted. Rule by fiat, rule by whim. And basically, everywhere that you see constitutionalism arise, it's in reaction to such a ruler. One of the first recorded instances of democracy and constitutionalism is in ancient Athens. The ancient Athenians, and this is something that we're going to get into, they didn't have a written constitution. However, they implemented constitutionalism after they had overthrown their ruler. The same is true in the Roman Republic. They had the rule of kings. They overthrew their kings and established constitutionalism. And the same is true, of course, in the United States, in the colonies, in the 18th century. With the American Revolution, we threw off the rule of the British and established our own government. So constitutionalism often arises after a king or a queen has been deposed. So I like to think of constitutionalism as limited government under a higher law, which also protects the individual rights of its citizens. So this begs the next question, which is, do you need a written constitution to have constitutionalism in government? And two of the examples I just cited, in ancient Athens, they did not have a written constitution. Basically, they overthrew the tyrant and implemented a set of conventions, norms, and rules that were applied over and over again. So the Athenians had rules for picking their leaders, rules for their elections, rules for their census, and the way government operated and the separation of powers. However, it wasn't written down. Everyone knew what it was, and they practiced it repeatedly, and it gained steam and power that way through precedent, which will be important through our future conversations. There might have been individual pieces of it written down, but it was not one nice, neat document like we have in the United States. And then the same is true in our second example, which is the Roman Republic. The Athenian democracy existed roughly from 700, 600 BC down to 300 BC. And then the Roman Republic existed from roughly 400, 500 BC all the way to about 45 BC. And the Roman Republic operated the same way. No written constitution. They overthrew a king and implemented rules and norms. Now, the same is true in what we are going to talk about next, which is the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom today is by legal scholars is widely seen as a constitutionalist government. However, they don't have a written constitution. They have a set of conventions and norms which they have applied over the centuries. And England, the United Kingdom, their evolution through constitutionalism is very fascinating and gives you a lot of insight. You could go back to, say, around the year 1000, 1100, 1200, and what you had was a dynamic between the King of England and the barons. The barons were individually powerful, these lords who had their own lands, but they also answered to the king, who was basically the most powerful baron of them all. And they fought many wars, conflicts between each other, and they would reach essentially they would reach agreements, or a king would be overthrown, a new one would come in and would implement new conventions of norms. And over a period of centuries, England developed a parliament. They developed the conventions and norms that lead to their current constitution. However, they don't have a nice, neat written constitutional text like the United States does. So the next question that we're going to ask is, what does a written constitution add? Why would it be better to have a written constitution over a non-written constitution like they have in the United Kingdom? Well, I sort of alluded to it before when saying that oftentimes constitutionalism arises after the overthrow of a dictator. A constitution, a written text, is a mechanism to get constitutionalism up and running. Oftentimes after a war, after revolution, after conflict, the country doesn't have this set of conventions and norms to just run along with. Okay, in England's case, it developed over many, many centuries. But in certain countries, take for example Iraq, in the 21st century, the United States went in, overthrew a dictator, and the Iraqis had a nice written constitution in order to get constitutionalism up and running in that country. And the same is true of the United States. After the American Revolution, the Founding Fathers came together and really wrote one of the first comprehensive, powerful written constitutions in the history of the world back in the 18th century. One of the reasons it's so magical. So in addition to it being a mechanism, a written constitution to getting a government up and running, what else does a written text bring? Well, what it can do is it can bind people in the future. And you can see that in the operation of the United States Constitution. This is something we will see over and over again. We go back to, the Second Amendment is a great example. The Second Amendment talks about the right to bear arms. It talks about a militia. Now, it's sort of set in the past. However, it's something that we hearken back to even now, 300 years later. It's still binding us. It's still affecting our laws today. So that's one of the points of the written Constitution, is it makes it harder to change, and it will bind people in the future. So it has some advantages over not having a written Constitution, which could be perceived as being more malleable, easier to change, because nothing's in writing. It's harder to go back and say, well, this is what was written, this is what was done in the past, so this is what we must do in the future. In England's case, that's probably not true. And going forward in the future, because everything is recorded now, written down, digital storage, we don't lose things like we did in the past. But having that written document can bind people in the future a lot stronger than a non-written constitutionalist system. Okay, so And one of the questions we're going to talk about in the future is whether the text alone is binding. And what you often see in constitutionalism and in the United States is you have the text, but you also have these conventions and norms, and both of them work together to form a constitutional system. So today we talked about what is constitutionalism. We talked about its history, how it often comes in reaction to a tyrannical government or a king. We talked about how you can have a constitutionalism without a text, but how a text, like in the United States, can bring added benefits. And we also chatted a little bit about exactly what constitutionalism is. And I believe my favorite definition is that it's limited government under a higher law run by a convention of sets and norms that also respects individual rights. So this is what we have in the United States, this constitutionalist government based on this written text. And the episodes going forward, we're going to get into the text itself, the operation of the Supreme Court, etc., through the study of case law and other history. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Tune in to get a greater understanding of the Constitution going forward. If you like this channel, please subscribe, like, comment, and share. It's a free way to support me. I also have a Patreon. Please feel zero pressure to donate, but if you like my content, you want me to make more, I'm accepting donations because I really enjoy doing this. I'd like to upgrade the quality of my videos, and I would need some donations and money to do that, but everything will likely go back into making better content. So thank you for tuning in, and I hope you watch again in the future. Joe the Lawyer out.